Welcome. I'm Michael Rugel from the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. It's a pleasure to be here today with Dr. Françoise Ouzan, author of the new book, True to My God and Country, How Jewish Americans Fought in World War II. First off, I want to thank a partner on this program. We're Sephardic Heritage International DC. It's been a great partner on this one, known as Shin DC. Shin DC builds intercultural bridges and understanding while raising awareness of Sephardic and other underrepresented Jewish heritages in the culture, arts, and history of the Middle East, North Africa, the Iberian Peninsula, the Greece, the Balkans, Turkey, and Asia. Through a focus on celebrating Sephardic and other underrepresented Jewish heritage and the potential for cross-cultural bridge building, Shin DC engages in cultural diplomacy by bringing together communities and working closely with the diplomatic community and the U.S. Congress. The Multicultural Jewish Arts Museum, a project of Shin DC, links multicultural Jewish narratives to African, Asian, Hispanic, and American communities and combats racism and hate, including anti-Semitism. They do a lot of great programming, Shin DC, to around the Sephardic experience. So definitely check out their stuff. It sounds like their Mimuna celebration from a couple of weeks ago was an epic event, and people are still recovering. So thanks to Shin DC for being a partner on this one. I've mentioned a couple of other things we have coming up here at the museum. This weekend, we are participating in the DuPont Colorama Museum Walk Weekend, in which 7 institutions, museums, and cultural institutions here within walking distance of us are all open for free. And we encourage people to get out and walk and visit as many of these museums as possible. They include the American Revolution Institute at Anderson House, Dumbarton House, a great federal style historic house, DuPont Underground, the O Museum in the Mansion, a very interesting place with all these secret doors, definitely worth exploring. The Phillips Collection, that's known as America's first museum of modern art, the President Woodrow Wilson House. So we got a lot of great institutions within walking distance, and we encourage people to get out this weekend for our museum walk. Coming up Tuesday, June 4th, we got a program in the building on whistleblowers, 4 who fought to expose the Holocaust to America. So that's a new book by Raphael Medoff that's in the form of a graphic novel. So they did it as a graphic novel telling the story of these whistleblowers within the Roosevelt administration, within the U.S. government, and coming to inform to the U.S. government to let people know what was going on in the Holocaust. So that'll be with Raphael Medoff, who's a great Holocaust historian, and Mark Zaid, who's a attorney that represents current whistleblowers. June 25th, we got another webinar coming up with Maurice Samuels, who wrote a new book on Alfred Dreyfus. It's called Alfred Dreyfus, the Man at the Center of the Affair, and it gets back to the Dreyfus as a human being and all the events that surrounded him with the Dreyfus affair, that it's so much influence on the way Jews were perceived in the 1890s. Today's program, we'll be discussing True to My God and Country, Dr. Ouzan's new book, which explores the diverse and varied experiences of American Jews serving in World War II. This includes stories of Americans serving in Europe, in the Pacific, in the China-Burma-India theater, POW experiences, the stories of female flyers, and many more. We chose today to focus on the experiences of American Jews stationed in Algeria, and for me, this is one of the areas where this work becomes interesting. You know, everything comes together. Men and women serving important military objectives in North Africa and in preparation for the invasion of Italy, while simultaneously having these fascinating Jewish cultural experiences and meeting the local Jews in places where they might not have expected there to be Jewish populations at all. We will get to questions at the end, so please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. We are recording this, and we'll have the program up on our YouTube channel before too long. So you can start submitting questions right now, but we will get to them after the presentation. Françoise Ouzan is Senior Research Associate at the Goldstein Goren Diaspora Research Center of Tel Aviv University. She's the author or editor of 11 books in French and in English, including most recently True to My God and Country. Before that, How Young Holocaust Survivors Rebuilt Their Lives, both of those published by Indiana University Press. She's also the author of Leaving Tomorrow, a historical novel that deals with displaced persons and their harsh treatment by the Allied military forces. She's been a keynote speaker in Germany, Israel, the United States, Switzerland, Belgium, France, China, and she joins us today from her home in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much, Michael. I'm honored and excited to be invited by the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. And I'm grateful to you, Michael Rugo, for the enthusiasm you first showed for my book. Now, a few words about my choice of this subject for today's presentation. My focus on French North Africa and Algeria in particular stems from colorful accounts related by my relatives about Jewish American service members. I must say that I have dedicated my book to 23-year-old Lieutenant Adar Goldin, a fallen IDF soldier officer who was captured during a ceasefire and has been held captive by Hamas in Gaza since 2014. Now, in True to My God and Country, my canvas is global. I explore the role of the more than 500,000 Jewish American men and women who served in the military in the Second World War. Patriots determined to fight Hitler, they served in every branch of the military and in every theater of the war. I demonstrate how encounters with Jewish communities and Jews overseas had an impact on Jewish service members and on their identities, whether in North Africa, India, or the Philippines. By examining the diverse nature of religious experience, including in the Pacific Islands, I challenge the perception of a singular form of Jewish identification in the military. Above all, the use of a rich array of life writing helps me add to the understanding of the Jewish American military experience from the perspective of servicemen and servicewomen themselves. Before delving into the subject, let's establish some key facts about the involvement of Jewish Americans in the military during World War II. So over 600,000 Jews served in the American Armed Forces, the largest number in uniform in all Jewish history, wrote Chaplain Philip Bernstein in December 1970. Chaplain Bernstein was actually appointed as executive director on the Committee on Army and Navy Religious Activities during World War II. So he was a very important person, and everything he wrote was very well documented. However, interviews and memoirs confirm the fact that some Jews in the military concealed their Jewish identity due to fear of encountering anti-Semitism during their service. Now, why did Jewish service members bear the letter H for Hebrew on their identification tags or dog tags when they served? Well, you can see it is circled on the bottom left, the H. Well, they revealed their identity as Jews, and this allowed them to be identified for Jewish burial. Many soldiers who strongly identified as Jews purposely held their dog tags, even when captured by the Nazis, so that they would be given a Jewish funeral. Now let's move on to explore the outline of this presentation. Now, why was the first major Allied invasion of the war in North Africa? The idea of daring amphibious Allied landings in Casablanca, Oran, and Algiers on the 8th of November 1942 came from British Prime Minister Winston Churchill. He persuaded President Roosevelt to establish a foothold on the Mediterranean shores. Why? To halt the advance of the Germans and the Italians in the Middle East. Churchill was intent on thwarting the troops led by General Rommel, Erwin Rommel. Rommel, the commander of Africa Corps, reached Tripoli in northwest Libya, as you know, in February 1941. Now, French North Africa was part and parcel of the French colonial empire and under the authority of the collaborationist Vichy government, with which the Roosevelt administration maintained diplomatic, yet very controversial relationships. While the political situation was complex, don't worry, I'll guide you through a crucial chapter of history that profoundly influenced the war and the lives of Jews in North Africa. Before the start of Operation Torch, President Roosevelt envisioned North Africa as a potential theater for anti-German activity, with plans to secretly recruit army or partisan units. To that end, General Eisenhower was in contact with several American vice consuls serving as intelligence agents. He was also in contact with General Mast of the French Army and senior American diplomat in Algiers, Robert Murphy. The question was the following: would the French generals, including the commander-in-chief of all Vichy forces, Admiral Darlan, oppose the landings and stand with the Vichy forces? The final aim of the Allied operation was to advance to the Tunis area to engage the Germans there. Now, on this slide, you can see the landings in Algeria. I think it's probably Oran, according to other pictures I saw from different angles. General Eisenhower explained that it was of the utmost importance that the landings succeed in the capital of Algeria, Algiers. To secure victory, the Allied landings must not meet with any harsh opposition from the Vichy forces. An expeditionary corps of 100,000 soldiers landed on the French North African coast. In Oran, the landings faced greater difficulties than in Algiers. General Eisenhower reported, and I quote from his memoir, "In Oran, we got ashore, but the French forces in that region, particularly the naval elements, resisted bitterly. There were casualties. On November the 10th, all fighting ceased, but it had been harsh." End of quote. In Oran, one of the troops, Corporal Bernard Kessel from Brooklyn, was put in the tank unit when the assault against the seaport was underway. Placed in the driver's seat, he was told to drive on. When he saw a roadblock barring the way, he accelerated and smashed through it. Although there were guns facing him, he rammed the gun position at full speed and went on, destroying everything on his way. That was what a reporter actually wrote. The GIs in his crew then opened fire in all directions. The newspaper headline that summarized the story read, "Orphan tank almost takes Oran by itself." When Kessel's mother read the story, she expressed astonishment. She wondered how this could have happened to her son, who didn't even know how to drive. I quote, my son was just naturally and handy when it came to mechanics. And he was, in fact, turned into a hero. No mention was made of the Jewish origin of Corporal Kessel, of course, as he was but a soldier in the American army. I remind you that there was no segregated Jewish unit, but there was a Black unit with African Americans only. So Jews were part of the American nation and as such were patriots. Whether they enlisted or were drafted, they often volunteered for the front lines out of patriotism. They also want to prove themselves and to prove the others, and especially to prove the anti-Semites that they were not cowards. That is what Kessel precisely did. Numerous Jews served as foot soldiers, tankmen, sailors on combat ships, airmen, medics, combat chaplains, or members of the Women's Army Corps in North Africa. And they distinguished themselves in spite of anti-Semitic attitudes and discriminatory promotion practices. Now, the heroic deeds of these soldiers are recorded in a document titled In the Nation's Service, which offers a compilation of facts concerning Jewish men in the armed forces during the first year of the war. On the next slide, yes, you can see the Silver Star awarded to 20-year-old Private Milton Gorobetz of Brooklyn. He was a graduate of Brooklyn College. He was assigned to the Medical Corps and sent to North Africa only 4 months after induction. I quote, "He had his ship torpedoed under him, swam to the beach, and under heavy fire worked among the wounded men who had fallen there." A war reporter added that the machine guns of the Vichy French forces strafed the shores fiercely on Moroccan shores at Casablanca. The private wrote home that he was, I quote, "utterly frightened and confused, and yet managed to take care of the wounded on November the 10th, 1942. In Morocco, the resistance of the Vichy forces to the American invasion led to about 3 days of bloody fighting. The citation for his silver medal mentioned, I quote, "that dedicated devotion to duty without regard for his own life were in keeping with the highest tradition of military service and reflected great credit upon himself and the United States Army." While the Anglo-American landings achieved surprise, they met resistance, but much less in Algiers than in Oran or Casablanca. Why? Well, the main reason is that several hundred young French Jews from Algeria played a crucial role in the French underground in assisting the Anglo-American landings. José Aboulker, a 20-year-old Jewish medical student, founded in September 1940 a resistance network in Algiers with his cousin, who did the same in Oran. More than 3/4 of them were Jewish. However, they were French patriots above all, and resistant fighters in pro-Nazi Vichy Algeria. Of course, there were non-Jewish French officers who joined the group composed of many students, and they established contact with Anglo-American military command. The operation in Algiers looked like a seizure of power. In a few sentences, in the middle of the night, small detachments of insurgents mounted surprise attacks, seizing the police headquarters, post office, radio station, and the headquarters of the military command of Algiers. Of course, the members of the underground had cut the telephone lines. A number of French officers, including Admiral Jean-François Darlan, whom I told you about before, were taken prisoner while, throughout the night, Radio Algiers transmitted orders to the French troops not to resist the Allied forces. Though the students' resistance groups suffered 2 casualties in Algiers, the Allies landed without having to fire a single shot. Shortly afterward, Admiral Darlan joined the Anglo-American forces. He was followed by the French generals under his command. So finally, they all decided to side with the victors, the Anglo-American forces. Therefore, after about 3 days of fighting, Algeria and Morocco were in the hands of the Allied forces. Now coming back to Oran, because you understood my focus was on Oran, one of the aims of the American army was to convert the town of Oran into a supply depot. This is Oran's main street, Rue Philippe. Now, a quick historical background about the Jews of Algeria. They had acquired French citizenship since the Crémieux Decree of 1870, but on the 7th of October 1940, the French Vichy government stripped them of their French citizenship, which would be restored only 3 years later. With their French citizenship revoked, French-speaking Jews living in Algeria could not fill any public function, and their children could no longer attend public schools. It was a trauma. They were persecuted socially and economically. The main question of my presentation finally arises: how did Jewish GIs manage to meet local Jews? On the eve of World War II, there was a vibrant community of about 120,000 Jews in Algeria. At that time, Algeria was a French territory, while Tunisia and Morocco were French protectorates. Jews in Oran lived among Europeans who generally fostered anti-Jewish feelings, especially during the Vichy regime. When Jewish American soldiers landed in North Africa, it was the first time they left home and their Jewish neighborhood. Whether they were observant or not, finding a synagogue was akin to finding an anchor. And this leads me to my second point. To what extent finding a synagogue was akin to finding an anchor? Attending a religious service was a means to express thankfulness for being alive after the landings. Let's recall that about a dozen GIs drowned on the shores of Algiers and Oran during Operation Torch. For the most observant soldiers, prayers conjured associations of family life at home. For others, indifferent Jews, for instance, attending a religious service at the Grand Synagogue of Oran could be an emotional experience, conveying feelings such as solidarity, empathy, and honor to be among the liberators. The Grand Synagogue was impressive, as you can see on this slide, and could accommodate at least 1,000 worshippers. Chaplain Earl Stone wrote that he rejoiced to find in Oran, I quote, "a very fine Jewish community with a most gorgeous synagogue." Now, the following quote is an example of an American soldier estranged from Judaism. But he was somehow overwhelmed when he attended a service. The GI actually admitted he was so far an indifferent Jew who considered his Jewishness as an accident of birth and not a meaningful heritage. I cannot resist reading that with you. Religion has had little influence on me. Yet, how can I explain the flow of tears involuntarily streaming when attending services at a synagogue for the first time in 20 years? Was I moved by the spectacle of hundreds of men in uniform from all the states of the Union? Prejudice naturally exists here, as it does at home. In Oran, like in other places in North Africa, Jewish homes became a refuge for soldiers who suffered from anti-Jewish hostility from their fellow soldiers. This quote challenges the perception of a singular form of identification in the American military. It also suggests what I demonstrate in my book. Rather than suppressing identification as Jews, anti-Jewish hostility may have led to a reawakening or an appearance of religious feeling. Now, being the adopted GI brought reassuring feelings of home. You know, most of the families in Algeria, but also in Morocco and in Tunisia after the occupation, they really prayed to have a GI. Everyone was so proud and so happy to have a GI at home. So you have to understand the enthusiasm that went on with this warm welcoming. So French Jews hosted Jewish GIs and also their non-Jewish friends. They were not going to ask them, "Are you Jewish too?" They saw they were friends. So it provided encouragement for the rest of the war. Therefore, small group solidarity, we can call that this way, but also the use of prayer books could reinforce a sense of religiosity. I'm not saying religion, but religiosity, and the comfort that goes with it. Now, the prayer book that was given to soldiers. Among the passages of their prayer books that were often dog-eared by soldiers is prayer for home. It reads, "Keep me under the influence of the ties that bind me to them, so that even in strange surroundings, I may conduct myself in ways that do them honor." And the phrase "strange surroundings" is interesting in reference to cultural differences in North Africa. This abridged prayer book dedicated to Jews in the armed forces of the United States was published by the National Jewish Welfare Board in 1941. Interestingly, they agreed to publish a prayer book that would represent conservative, Orthodox, and Reform Judaism. Now, what's the use of a prayer book? In stressful moments, before a battle or after a tragic loss, prayer books could bring solace, a form of comfort. Also, at the synagogue, books created a bond between GIs who tried to follow the service and who were completely lost, and local Jews. In fact, the prayers were different, a bit different, and sung on Sephardic melodies, and that makes it really different, so that it was not easy to follow. So a question arises, could the warmth of Jews in Algeria help them overcome the cultural differences? And this leads me to my third point about encounters with local Jews and Jewish refugees. Now, once the battle had, this is a quote by a veteran, Herbert Cohen. What is interesting in what he said, once the battle had subsided in the immediate area of Oran, G.I. Joe renewed his stance in the exploration of civilization, strange in outward appearance, but human and identical under the skin. So Herbert Cohen was a proud GI, proud of his Jewish heritage. His memoir, which I read, provides a rather literary rendering of what he went through, referring to himself as G.I. Joe. I haven't seen many like this. And briefly, he enlisted in the army in February 1941, and he was a technician. One of his tasks in Oran was to unload supplies, vehicles, and ammunition. On this slide, he emphasizes his dual identity as both an American soldier and a Jew, highlighting both universal and specific experiences. In the synagogue of Oran still, Cohen participated in religious services that led him to build friendships. In a number of soldiers' accounts of experiences in North Africa, we learn that North African Jews manage, in their broken English, to communicate with GIs. In other cases, the soldiers' knowledge of a smattering of the French language was helpful. Some soldiers understood how much Jews from Algeria suffered from social exclusion and economic persecution because of the Vichy laws. Many Jewish GIs rushed to the Jewish sections of the towns they were in, as we can see with Herbert Cohen. They not only observed closely the lives of local Jews, but also described them with deep insight. And that is what is really amazing and so interesting to research. He noted that the refugees he met were, I quote, secretive in the revelation of their identities because of the persecution they had endured. I'm speaking of refugees from Europe. Other testimonies show that North Africa was not a safe refuge for persons who fled Nazi persecution in Europe. A few refugees from Germany and Austria who worked as interpreters in Tunisia were deported by the SS when their identities were discovered. And this happened, of course, after the 9th of November, when 1942, when Tunisia remained occupied for 6 months by the Nazis. Now, in Casablanca, some Jews confessed to Jewish GIs their fear that the Nazis were going to kill them. So American servicemen were then not only perceived as liberators, but also as confidants. The next slide introduces us to a lively portrait of Passover in Algeria in April 1943, still provided by Herbert Cohen in his memoir. A mixture of fez hats added that certain native hue and the influx of American, British, and Free French, and hence the extraordinary color scheme of the congregation. Cohen added that servicemen were invited by Jewish families to celebrate Passover and attend the traditional Seder, the special religious ceremony and meal that commemorate Passover at their homes. Interestingly enough, a Haggadah, the booklet containing the Passover Eve ceremony, was printed in Casablanca for use of Jewish personnel of the Army and Navy of the United States in the year 1943. It bore the following words in red on its front page. You can read it. Because the Passover is the feast of the deliverance, but from the misspelling of deliverance, one is inclined to think it was printed in a hurry. Another reason for the French way of spelling the word, another reason apart from the French way of spelling the word, and also for the syntax of that sentence that sounds a bit French, is the fact that it may have been edited with the cooperation of the Alliance Israélite Française, a major French organization which had established Jewish schools throughout Casablanca. Like most religious publications for American Jews in the armed forces, Haggadot, the plural of Haggadah, as you know, were produced by the Jewish Welfare Board. The Haggadah outlines what needs to be told and taught, what is to be eaten as symbolic food, and it is quite striking that in their memoirs, veterans describe, even some veterans describe the texture of haroset, a mixture of dates, apples, wine, and groundnuts that serves as a reminder of the mortar Jews used to build Egyptian pyramids. So during and immediately after World War II, the Seder, a religious requirement, was conducted in large rooms adjacent to a synagogue. Eating matzah instead of bread for 8 days is an important requirement that symbolizes the haste with which the Hebrews departed from Egypt, I remind you. But when in Algeria, Jewish GIs were surprised to see that the matzah they ate did not resemble the flattened, unleavened bread eaten in America, which rather looked like a big cracker. The rituals of Passover, which teach the evils of slavery and celebrate freedom, could not have been more relevant during the war. They reminded soldiers about Nazi enslavement in concentration camps, because then news of the death camps started to spread in 1942. Of course, not all the soldiers knew that, but because a lot of them were children of European immigrants, they had family in Europe, they could have been aware of that. The North African campaign ended about a month after Passover, with the surrender of Axis forces on the 13th of May, 1943. As Michael Ruggles noted, in an inspiring article on World War II Agadot, the Seder took place on April 19th, 1943. Now, the essence of Passover, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs argued, is a powerful narrative of hope. And that narrative had a positive psychological impact on Jewish service members. This is what I perceived in their memoirs. So viewed in that light, Jewishness was not a burden, but an asset that instilled strength. GIs could share a sense of belonging, inspired by memories of home in connection to rituals. This was true even for non-observant Jews. They experienced a collective feeling of belonging beyond the boundaries of their own countries. I'm interested in the notion of homesickness, and I found in a great book by author Rick Atkinson that the American military gave code names to Algerian villages near Oran. Those names were drawn from soldiers' hometowns like Syracuse or Brooklyn. In that perspective, connection or reconnection to Jewish rituals awakened not only the GI's interest in Judaism, but also a feeling of pride in one's Jewishness. And that feeling of pride could help rebuff anti-Semitic slurs from fellow soldiers. Some rabbis in French North Africa, for instance, gave a blessing to all the Allied forces present in their synagogues. Soldiers sense that someone other than their families cared for them. And this happened in Tunisia in particular. A soldier attended religious services in Le Kef, Tunisia, where Jews had been under German occupation from the 9th of November, I told you, to the 8th of May, 1943. The GI was impressed by the warmth and religious fervor of the French-speaking Jews. But even though many, we can say that despite the differences between Ashkenazi and Sephardic cultures, observant and non-observant Jews took comfort in traditional Judaism in North Africa. For instance, GIs were introduced to couscous during Friday evening meals, marking their first experience with a dish as Americans. The oral testimonies I collected from Jews from families invited soldiers from Allied armies also. Sorry. These memoirs mention the gifts that GI sent to their kids after the war. So this is to tell you about the bonds. Additionally, correspondence from French Jews in Iran spanning from 1944 to 1948 and written in English sheds light on the amicable connections forged between Jewish soldiers and the local Jewish community. And this brings me to a last part about the mutual boosting of morale between Jewish soldiers and Algerian Jews. Now you can see on that slide chaplain welfare. Chaplains' welfare's report to the Chaplaincy Commission is significant regarding the interactions between American and North African Jews. Those encounters brought him much joy, as you can read on this slide. It was an inspiring sight to watch those French-speaking Sephardic family youngsters, about 200 of them, singing the same Palestinian songs that our youngsters sing back in the US. Of course, he refers to songs in Hebrew that probably the éclaireur israélite would sing, songs like perhaps Hine ma tov u'manaim. Anyway, Chaplain Louis Werfer's name is one of the 14 inscribed on a monument for fallen Jewish chaplains in Arlington National Cemetery's Chaplain's Hill. Like most chaplains, he was a moral builder. He was the only Orthodox chaplain killed in action in World War II. On duty with the 12th Air Force Service Command in North Africa, he was nicknamed the Flying Rabbi because he wanted to reach as many servicemen as possible. His initiative could only be feasible by plane. On the way back to conduct a Hanukkah service in Casablanca in 1943, he was warned about the bad weather. On a foggy December day of the year 1943, his plane crashed into an unseen mountain top shortly after takeoff. What is really interesting is that one of his last requests to the Jewish Welfare Board was to ask 10,000 prayer books in French translation to be sent to the Jewish men serving in the French Free Forces. So you can see that the presence of Allied forces boosted the morale of Jews in Oran and elsewhere in various ways. French Jews who were then teenagers living in Algeria and excluded from school could not forget the anguish they felt at home before the Allied invasion. I collected a few testimonies. Yet the landings brought about liberating atmosphere. One of them told me that. But what really rejoiced the children's hearts and taste buds, I must say, were the Hershey's chocolate bars, which GIs distributed generously with other sweets. At this stage, I would like to offer partial conclusions. 4 points may be highlighted to sum up the far-reaching and multifaceted consequences of Jewish GIs, of the interactions between Jewish GIs with local and Jewish populations in North Africa. First point, these encounters were mutually influential, benefiting both sides. They encouraged lobbying efforts of the leaders of the French Jewish community in Algeria, who appealed to the American Jewish Committee and the World Jewish Congress. Second point, I could also mention the American Jewish Distribution Committee, an organization that really helped North Africa afterwards, after World War II. Second point, these interactions provided a boost to the morale of Jewish soldiers, reinforcing their courage to continue the war. Third point, these war experiences fostered a sense of collective responsibility for Jews co-religionists. Americans realized that they had come to North Africa to fight both an American and a Jewish battle against the Third Reich and its allies. Finally, this interaction helped bridge Jewish communities overseas, notably leading to marriages after the war. Jewish soldiers invited into Jewish homes sometimes formed lasting connections that transcended geographical boundaries. However, not all Jewish GIs had the opportunity to attend services at the synagogue and interact with local Jews in French North Africa. Some, like Captain Mark Zera, who then fought with the 1st Infantry Division in Normandy on D-Day, makes no mention of the Jewish communities he might have met while in North Africa. But Others had special assignments, and they were changed by their military service in North Africa. Now let's delve very quickly into some impactful encounters that also took place in North Africa. This slide introduces you to Lieutenant Maurice Paper during his service in Algeria. Here he stands alongside a British officer next to a proud camel. Delving into Paper's story was truly inspiring. Arriving in Algiers in February 1943, his direct interaction with General Eisenhower empowered him to utilize his language skills in French, German, and Yiddish during his duties in Germany and France. He served as a combat engineer in North Africa and was assigned to General Eisenhower's Allied Force Command stationed in Algiers. The lieutenant was later promoted, I think, by Eisenhower to the rank of captain later on. In Oran, actually not in Oran, in North Africa, he was in charge of 300 Berbers in a labor camp financed by the American military, but run by the British. He was the American engineer officer in charge of the Berbers who were hired to help load and unload supplies from ships and trains. The lieutenant was then sent to Italy and later on to Germany. Above all, his interactions in Algiers with General Eisenhower led him to undertake a significant mission to the Dachau concentration camp. I further explored this outstanding story in an accompanying article published in the journal Moreshet and online on Academia. I think you see it on that slide. Now the next slide. This leads me to a touching reunion between former New York Governor Herbert Lehman and his daughter Hilda de Vatetsky, a member of the Women's Army Corps in Algiers. Lehman's 3 children served in World War II. His oldest son, Peter, a pilot, was killed after flying 57 combat missions. And the New York governor had not seen his daughter in a year. And this moment highlights the sacrifices and contributions of Jewish service women like Hilda, whose experiences challenged societal norms and prejudices. I think the same year, her brother died. In this slide, you will find a quote by General Eisenhower, finally acknowledging the work performed by women in the Women's Army Corps. This reflects a broader shift in attitudes among high-ranking officers towards women in the military, a theme I explored in my book. It is also in North Africa that service members encountered the virulent anti-Semitism on the part of European French settlers during the Vichy regime. The last slide offers further reading on how Jewish American servicewomen and servicemen confronted and coped with anti-Semitic slurs, providing deeper insight into their resilience and determination amidst adversity. In Algeria, and this is very striking, a veteran was shocked by a graffiti on a wall. That is, when I say a veteran, that's a soldier, of course, who wrote a memoir. And he said, and he wrote, I quote, "The first things which struck my eyes when I strolled throughout the streets of Oran were the vicious slogans painted all over the buildings. Vive Pétain, mort à la juiverie. It meant long live to Pétain, death to the Jews. It referred to General Pétain, a national hero who fought in World War II and was later discredited as chief of state of the French collaborationist Vichy government. And surprisingly, a soldier noted, a GI noted that his service overseas in the American military was, I quote, the best educational institution in the world. Thank you all for your attention.
Thank you, thank you. And we can send out some of the links you have in your presentation in a follow-up email to everyone who registered, so everyone can see these articles. Let me start off with one question from me that I've been curious about for a little while. You shared the Haggadah used in the 43 Seder and mentioned the French organization, Les Alliances Israélite Universelle, and excuse my atrocious attempt at French there. But can you tell me maybe, I've been curious, I know that's a very old organization, and are you aware of them doing more stuff for American or Allied soldiers during the war?
No, I didn't see anything else actually, but this could be a research in itself. Actually, those who helped with this Agada were the former students of the Alliance Israélite Universelle. But obviously, it was such a big organization that they were extremely efficient and helpful.
Okay, yeah. We have a couple questions about marriages, and maybe a follow-up to the last presentation we did on War Bride. David Goldstein asks, how common were marriages between Jewish American service people and local Algerian Jews in the World War II period? And a similar question from Gary Ginsberg. Are there cases of American soldiers in North Africa who married a local woman? Have you come across any marriage stories?
Oh yes, of course. There were many marriages, and not there were marriages, and there were also broken hearts, because marriages, yes, they were brides. Okay, that's a point in itself. But also, someone told me, one of the French people in Casablanca, I interviewed. Told me that his sister was really in love with an American soldier. Actually, he was not sure whether he was Jewish or not, but anyway, she was in love. They had thought, I think he must have been Jewish, because they were thinking of getting married, and then when he left, nothing. And apparently she went through a depressive stage, so she must not have been the only one, because GIs were really the liberators. They were they were a symbol. Not only that there was another world. These people spoke French. They didn't want necessarily to identify with the local people, and it was for them a dream to to the girls, that was for them a dream to marry an American GI.
Yeah, so some happy endings for the wartime romances, and some not so. I guess that's the nature of those kind of relationships.
Yes, but another thing that is interesting is the fact that after the Allied invasion, a lot of babies bore the names like William, Steve, James, and so on. Daisy for the women. So really, they had an impact. The Americans had an impact on the local Jews.
Is that true outside of the Jewish population? Did the impact on the non-Jewish Algerians, does that have a lasting impact?
I didn't do a research
Yeah.
on non-Jews. Not, I don't. I would be inclined to say that they must have had an impact, obviously, as liberators, but some of them, the non-Jews who were anti-Semites, expected the Germans. You have to understand that. Um, uh, um, a number of people told me that their assets were already registered and given to non-Jews. So if they had been deported to concentration camps, they would have lost everything, and everything, and also the yellow stars were ready.
Yeah. Lisa Dueck asked for clarification on the matzah. What was different about the Algerian matzah, and did any soldiers write about a different type of haroset, one made of dates and raisins in the form of jam? So the Ashkenazi haroset versus the Sephardic haroset. Did that show up in any of these soldiers'
I,
narratives?
I don't know how you are used to what your grandparents, how your grandparents did the haroset, but I'm pretty sure they would have used the ground nuts. But here they described it. Maybe it was, I think they had more spices in North Africa, so maybe there was more cinnamon. They were more.
Yeah.
Yes, I think.
And the matzah is more kind of flexible. Maybe you could describe the taste and the feel of the Algerian matzah.
Oh, it's thicker. You can break a tooth on it. And also some said that it looked a little bit like because it has hollows. It looked like pretzels.
Mhm.
So it depended who did them. Maybe not every house had the same.
A question from Naor Wallach. In your book, you discuss the Jewish soldier experience and how many of them became more aware of the religion during the war. Since there is a well-known aphorism that states there are no atheists in a foxhole, could you please expand on why you did not compare the Jewish experience to the non-Jewish experience, which might have been similar?
The non-Jewish experience. I think someone did a thesis on that. His name is Walters. He did a thesis, and he compared. So this subject was really something that had been sort of deepened already. But no atheist in a foxhole. Yes, this was true. This was true for non-Jews, but Jews, for instance, I have examples of someone who had, his mother had sent him a bottle of medicine, a small bottle of medicine. He had emptied it. She had put some wine, and every Friday night, he made the kiddush. He tried to light a candle, but he was really careful enough so that it was really at the bottom of his foxhole so that nobody would see. So in fact, non-Jews and Jews had their own ways to adapt religious practices. Sometimes they had nothing to do anymore with the actual official religious practice, but it was emotional, because obviously there's no atheist in a foxhole, because it's a matter of life and death.
Yeah, we're just about out of time, but I did want to acknowledge a couple of the comments, I guess, more in the questions in the Q&A. Robin Gorino, U.S. troops were in North Africa before November 1942. My father, Staff Sergeant Jerome Ginsburg, landed in North Africa in June 1942 as part of the 525th Heavy Ordnance. I have pictures of Rosh Hashanah 1943 and Passover in Egypt, I believe. So always interesting to hear those experiences. I'm sure we got a lot of folks on whose family uh, were World War II veterans. Another one
In,
from, yeah, go ahead.
in Egypt, no, I did not come across anything of the like. But I must tell you that in order to get very in-depth memoirs, I went to the YIVO archives, and I could find memoirs that were very detailed. And I preferred to actually base my research on those who were written in 1946. Because when time elapses, obviously you can rewrite history and you don't remember that well.
You
So no, I didn't. I would be actually. I welcome any type of testimonies.
Was it a challenge to find accounts that were written right after the war?
Sorry.
Was it difficult to find enough accounts written right after the war discussing these experiences?
Yes, right after the war. Yes, because they had to go on with life. Well, first of all, there was the GI Bill. So the GI Bill, that was the masterpiece. It enabled them to get an education. They had to. It's very difficult to adapt from a military life to a civil life. So you're not going to write immediately unless you're like Norman Mailer or other. There were
Right.
many veterans who were wonderful writers,
Yeah.
Herman Wouk, and
Yeah.
uh,
Unless you're one of the greatest writers of your generation and of all time,
absolutely,
right?
those were the greatest writers. So unless you have this temperament that you want to put everything down, to write everything down, you prefer to get along with your life, and really taking this opportunity to study was very important. Also, what veterans did almost immediately in the suburbs, they started building congregations, and they were also very connected to Israel. And as you know, because you mentioned to me Marcus before, some of them also went on fighting in the War of Independence.
Yeah, and those are fascinating stories of World War II vets that were in Israel and for the 48 War of Independence. Well, that's a subject for another time.
Yes.
So thank you so much for all the research you did on this book. I would recommend everybody get a copy, and we will send out a link in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. So thank you to everyone for being on. Francois, do you have any final words?
Well, thank you all for your patience. I tried to be brief, but you told me I could take time. Well, my final word, war is hell. And in the end, even though they wrote all that, meeting people, I mean, war is experiencing loss and grief. And perhaps being Jewish, like being a Catholic, I mean, any religion, it's perhaps one of the reasons why Eisenhower, when he became president, he said, I think it was when he was going to become president, he said, no matter which religion, but the American people, he said it better than that. The American people need to have a religion because it's a spiritual comfort in any situation. But as I showed on one of the slides, not all the soldiers had these warm encounters. For some, it was hell. For some, North Africa is the mosquitoes who were there to bite them. It's the lack of water. It's venereal diseases. It's women they could not approach because they had a chaperone with them all the time. Of course, it was easier to be in the home Jewish families' home, because then you could get to know the women. Otherwise, it was terrible. Yes, the venereal problems, venereal diseases were a problem in North Africa, just like water. There were a lot of drunken people in North Africa because, they said there was not enough good water. Water was always salty, and when you got a shower, you were all sticky. There were many complaints, but I chose to focus on the positive sides.
Yeah, like all experience, they're never going to be all good or all bad, and we'll leave it at that. We are recording this, so we will send out the recording to everyone as well. And so, thank you so much
Well,
for being
thank you
around.
again. Thank you again for this warm invitation. And yes, it was a way to bridge the gap in North Africa between two civilizations, the Sephardic civilization and the Ashkenazi one.
Yeah. All right, everyone, have a good afternoon, good night in Jerusalem, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
everybody soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Same to you. Bye-bye.